It wasn't the fall that hurt. It was the fact that no one helped me up. I landed hard on the patio stones, right elbow first, then hip. Someone gasped. Someone else chuckled. From the corner of my eye, I saw Davy, my son, glance back at me, then look away, laughing along with a group of neighbors he barely knew before the move to Oak Ridge. My chair, was already taken by some woman in a sundress holding a wine cooler. I don't think she even noticed I'd been there. The heat was choking, the kind that makes your bones feel like rubber. My blouse clung to my back. I sat there, stunned for a second, hand on the ground, eyes on my own shoes. Brown loafers. Worn in, but still polished. I always polish them before a gathering. Raised that way. Someone finally extended a hand. Emma, my granddaughter. 17, sharp as a tack. She leaned over, her cheeks flushed. "Grandma, are you okay?" I nodded. Of course I nodded. That's what women like me do. We nod. We say, "I'm fine," even when our tailbone's on fire and our son just humiliated us in front of 30 people. I stood up with Emma's help. Someone started the music again, oldies, ironically. Laughter bubbled up near the grill, burgers sizzling, kids running, and me, suddenly invisible, again. The microphone lay forgotten on the buffet table, next to the potato salad and the 4th version of Kim's vegan coleslaw. I looked at it for a long moment. My hands were shaking, but not from the fall. Something inside me had snapped so quietly I hadn't noticed at first. But now it was roaring. I walked over and picked it up. "Hey," someone said, "the music's about to start." "No," I answered, flipping the switch on the mic. "I think I'll say something first." Heads turned slowly, one by one, like someone had flipped a switch inside them too. Emma backed up, watching me, her eyes wide but steady. I stepped onto the wooden bench and then, slowly, with effort, onto the table. My legs trembled, not from age, but from the weight of years. Decades of silence, of being the helper, the cleaner, the quiet checkbook. I stood tall. The mic crackled. "You pushed me," I said, voice calm. "Maybe not on purpose, maybe not thinking, but you pushed me. Off a chair, off a seat I held for years in this family. And nobody blinked." Silence. "I was the one who made this barbecue happen every year until you decided your backyard was fancier. I was the one who cooked, cleaned, invited, hosted, smiled through it all. And now I'm the one who gets shoved aside so someone else can have my seat?" A few faces shifted uncomfortably. Davy stood near the cooler, arms crossed. "I have been quiet. I have been generous. I have said yes to every request, signed every check, baked every birthday cake, watched every child, and sat in every waiting room. And all I've asked for in return was a place at the table." Someone, maybe Kim, muttered something about making a scene. I ignored her. I won't be invisible anymore. Not to my son, not to this family, and certainly not at my own barbecue. The mic hummed as I paused. My throat was dry, but I wasn't done. "Don't worry," I said. "I'll get down in a minute. But while I'm up here, while you're all actually looking at me, I want you to remember this moment. Because I won't be crawling back into the kitchen to scrub the dishes and smile while you call me outdated." The children had stopped running. One of the neighbor ladies sat with her mouth open. I saw Emma, still standing in the back, nodding slightly. Her eyes glistened. And then I did get down. Slowly. One foot, then the other. Back on the ground. The mic in my hand. I placed it back on the buffet table. Then I walked into the house, alone, while the party swirled behind me like smoke from something burning. They said later it wasn't a push, just an accident. Someone bumped into Davy, he lost balance, and my chair tipped. But you and I both know the difference between an accident and disregard. That chair, wobbly old thing with the faded cushion, was just a symbol, a stand-in for everything else I'd been slowly pushed out of. Sunday dinners, family plans, conversations I wasn't included in, jokes that flew over my head because I wasn't around when they were born. It started slow, as these things do. First, they moved the gatherings to Davy's house. More room, Kim said. Easier for the kids. I nodded. Of course I did. I always nodded. Even when the real reason was that my kitchen didn't have granite countertops and my yard wasn't Pinterest ready. Then it was the group chats I wasn't part of. The birthday gifts for the grandkids that were decided without me. The dinner plans made while I stood in the kitchen, drying my hands. And now, my chair. Taken. Just like that. I sat in the den, inside their air-conditioned, magazine-ready home, and listened to the muffled music and laughter outside. The windows were closed, but the sound carried. I heard someone yell, "Turn it up!" and another person cheer when a new song came on. Probably that same neighbor who called me adorably old-fashioned when I tried to talk about my garden last year. I looked around the room. There framed photos on the walls, vacations I wasn't invited to, smiling faces on sailboats, matching outfits at Christmas, Disney World. I was in one picture, a blurry one, from 5 years ago. The clock ticked. A smell of grilled onions wafted through the vents. My hands were still trembling, but slower now, steadier. Like something inside me was adjusting, not breaking, realigning. Emma came in after 10 minutes. Quiet as always, like she didn't want to disturb anything. She didn't speak right away, just sat beside me. "I thought they were going to clap," she said softly. I smiled. They never clap for the truth. She looked at me, thoughtful. Grown up in that way, only girls who've had to watch their mothers perform for approval become. "You were brave, Grandma." "No," I said, and it surprised me how steady my voice had become. "I was just tired. Tired of pretending that being needed was the same as being loved. Tired of thinking that my usefulness was my worth." We sat together in silence. She took my hand. No words, just presence. Outside, someone lit sparklers. I saw the flicker through the window panes. A child screamed with delight, and the music kept playing, louder now, like they were trying to drown out what I'd said, as if volume could erase memory. I heard Davy's voice once, rising over the crowd. "She's just old. Let it go. She gets dramatic sometimes." Dramatic. Funny. I was never dramatic when I was babysitting 3 kids under 5. Never dramatic when I paid for Davy's first year of college after his financial aid fell through. Never dramatic when I watched his marriage fall apart the first time and held his hand through it. Then again when he remarried and didn't even ask me to help with the planning, just the check. But now, when I stand up, literally, for myself, I'm dramatic. Emma must have heard it too. She squeezed my hand tighter. "I don't like how he talks about you," she whispered. "Like you're fragile. Like you can't hear." "I hear everything," I said. And I did. Every unspoken expectation, every backhanded compliment, every silence where a thank you should have lived. "I'm not going back out there," I said after a while. Emma nodded. "I didn't think you would." And then she surprised me. "Can I stay in here with you?" It was a small thing, but my throat caught anyway. Of course you can, I said. She got up, turned off the hallway light, and came back with a blanket. Sat beside me again, knees folded, like she used to when she was little, and we'd watch old musicals on the worn couch I had back in my old house. And that was how the rest of the evening passed. The party went on without us. Fireworks. Toasts. Pictures I wouldn't be tagged in. Laughter I wasn't invited to. But I had Emma. I had a quiet room. I had a voice I'd finally used. And for once, I wasn't invisible to myself. There was a time when my voice filled rooms. Not with speeches, no, just with life. You wouldn't have recognized me then. I was the woman with the garden that fed 3 families, the woman who baked pies so good that the church ladies whispered about secret ingredients and tried to trade me theirs, the woman who could carry a child on one hip and a feed sack on the other and still make dinner from scratch before sundown. Before silence became habit, I was noise. Good, useful noise. I married young. Most of us did back then. Jack was tall, patient, and always smelled faintly of tobacco and soil. We lived on 10 acres in Ridgefield, in a house with crooked windows and a leaky roof that he swore he'd fix every spring. He died before he could, of course. Heart stopped in his sleep. Just didn't wake up one morning. That was 15 years ago. Davy gave the eulogy, called Jack, the kind of man every boy should be lucky enough to have as a father. Everyone cried. Even me, though most of my tears had dried out by then. After Jack, I stayed. What else was I going to do? The farm was too much for one woman alone, but I wasn't ready for the city. I made do for a while. Sold the goats, let the orchard go, held onto the porch swing like it was a lifeline. And then Davy said, "Mom, it's time you move closer." He framed it like a kindness, said he didn't want me to be alone out there, said I could be near the grandkids, be part of things. What he didn't say, what no one says out loud, is that it's easier when your aging parent is within reach, not emotionally, just logistically. So I sold the house, the one with the garden and the sagging roof and the kitchen where every one of my kids had spilled something and cried at least once. I sold it and I moved to a condo 20 minutes from Davy's place. That was the first time I disappeared a little. No one asked me if I wanted to. They praised me instead. So wise. So practical. So generous. I furnished the condo with what I could salvage. A few chairs, some books, Jack's old recliner, even though it didn't match anything. And I waited. For dinners. For drop-ins. For a knock on the door. For the life they said I'd be a part of. It came sometimes. Usually when they needed something. Can you watch Molly this Saturday? Mom, do you have the number for that plumber again? Grandma, my paper's due tomorrow. Can you help proofread? Of course I said yes. Always yes. Because love, I thought, was in the doing. I was needed. That had to mean I was loved, didn't it? But slowly, over the years, the needs stopped sounding like gratitude. They became expectations. I became background. Someone reliable, but forgettable. Kind of like the bathroom light. No one thinks about it until it stops working. And then came the comments. Tiny things. Don't wear that scarf, Mom. It makes you look old. Grandma, we don't use that word anymore. It's outdated. Maybe just let the kids talk, okay? They're trying to explain their world. I adapted, changed words, folded scarves away, laughed when they joked about how slow I texted. But each little change erased a part of me, until one day I realized I didn't recognize myself anymore. Not in the mirror, not in my stories, not in the way they looked at me. At the family dinners, I started listening more than talking. I'd bring a dish and then slip into the kitchen while they debated politics or influencers I'd never heard of. I'd wash dishes no one asked me to, pick up wrappers they left behind, leave before dessert, and no one noticed. No one said, "Wait, Mom, you didn't get a slice." No one followed me to the door. No one missed me when I left. Until the day of the barbecue, I hadn't said any of this out loud. I hadn't even admitted it to myself. But sitting in Davy's den, with the music outside and Emma beside me, I finally began to see it all clearly. Not with bitterness, with honesty. I wasn't part of their world anymore. I was a utility, a function, a relic. And the only one who could change that was me. The first time I was talked over, I laughed, thought it was just excitement. We were all sitting at Kim's dining table, this was maybe 7 years ago, talking about Emma's science fair project. I said, "You know, when Davy was her age," and before I could finish, he cut in with some joke about TikTok, and the whole table erupted in laughter. I waited a beat, thought he'd circle back, invite me to finish. He didn't. The conversation moved on. That was the first time. It wouldn't be the last. They weren't cruel. Not in the way people think of cruelty. They didn't yell, didn't hit, didn't exile me from family photos. No. What they did was quieter, more efficient. They muted me. It started with interruptions, then dismissals, corrections. "Actually, Mom," or "No, Grandma, it's not like that anymore." And always with a smile. Like they were helping me adjust, like I should be grateful to be updated on the new ways of the world. One Thanksgiving, I told a story about how Jack once burnt the turkey, but saved it by stuffing it with oranges. They laughed politely, then shifted back to talking about air fryers and plant-based roasts. That year, I was seated at the far end of the table next to the high chair. I remember looking down the table, at the laughter, the wine, the passing of dishes from hand to hand, and realizing I was no longer part of the chain. I was a branch off to the side, an add-on, a respected antique. You don't yell at your grandmother. You don't insult her. You just move her. You make sure she's comfortable. You include her name in the invitation, but not her voice in the room. And slowly, I began to comply. I stopped bringing up stories they didn't ask for. I started asking what I could bring rather than deciding myself. I waited for their cue to speak. I stayed quiet when I disagreed. Silence, I thought, would buy me peace, a place. Instead, it bought me erasure. I think the worst moment wasn't when they forgot my birthday last year. Not even when they texted, "Happy B-Day, Mom," as if I were a friend from middle school they barely remembered. No, the worst moment was a few weeks later. Emma had a school play. I offered to help with costumes. Sewing has always been something I do well. Kim smiled and said, "That's sweet, but we've got it. You just come and clap. Just come and clap." That line stuck with me, rolled around my head like a loose marble, as if that's all I was good for now, sitting, watching, clapping at the appropriate times. And I did. I sat in the third row. I watched Emma shine on stage. I clapped when it was over. I smiled. But inside, I felt something closing. Like a door, softly but firmly, shutting me out of the world I'd helped build. After the play, when everyone took photos and shared videos, no one asked me to join. I stood to the side, holding my coat, and then walked back to the parking lot alone. No one noticed I'd left. I remember sitting in my car, staring at the dashboard, thinking, so this is how it happens. Not with a blow. Not with a fight. With a fade. A gentle, steady fade into the background. It doesn't happen all at once. You don't just become invisible in a single day. No, they teach you how. One skipped conversation at a time. One, "Don't worry, we've got it," after another. Until the only time you're clearly seen is when you break the rules, like standing on a table with a microphone. That's what they noticed. Not my silence. My noise. That's what shook them. Because they had come to believe the version of me they'd created. A quiet woman who bakes and nods and leaves the room quietly. And I had helped them believe it. Until I didn't. It's strange how money becomes memory. I never thought of myself as rich. Jack and I worked hard. We saved, we reused, we patched and repurposed. Our luxury was a screened porch and a freezer full of our own vegetables. But over time, the things I gave started taking different shapes, not pies or advice or rides to the doctor, but checks. Davy's first car? Used, but solid. Paid for it in full. "I'll pay you back, Mom," he said. I told him not to worry. That was 24 years ago. Their first home? Down payment. They had a baby on the way, and Kim's job was shaky. I remember the way they cried when I handed over the check. "This is your home too, Mom," she'd said. I never spent a night in that house. Private school tuition when they said the public system was failing. Dance classes, soccer uniforms, SAT prep, braces, emergencies. Always an emergency. They never asked cruelly, never demanded. They asked like children do, with hope. And I responded the way I always had, with instinct. Open purse, open hands, open door. Because I thought, this is what love looks like. Provision. Jack used to say, "Let them scrape a bit, Mari." It teaches them something. But I couldn't bear to watch them struggle. Maybe because I'd seen struggle firsthand. My own mother dying too young, my father fixing engines with busted fingers. I swore I'd make things easier for my kids. And I did. I just didn't expect the price. Because over time, I stopped being a mother and became a bank. With no interest rates, no repayment plans, no signatures. Only quiet withdrawals. The thanks got shorter. The requests got more casual. "Could you just Venmo it? We're tight this month." Just until the next paycheck. One day, I realized I knew their PINs, but they didn't know my doctor's name. I could recite the schedule of every grandchild, but none of them knew what book I'd last read. I used to write checks with a soft smile, imagining the smile on their faces when they got what they needed. But the last few years, I noticed something different in myself. A tiny pause. A hesitation. Not because I regretted giving, but because I was starting to wonder if I was still giving or just being taken. The barbecue was just the latest installment. I'd paid for half the catering, quietly, of course. Kim had mentioned how expensive it was getting, and I offered without being asked. "Let me take care of it," I'd said. "It's for family." What a word that was. Family. I paid for a party where I was pushed aside. Literally. Figuratively. And no one blinked. When I stood on that table and said, "I won't be invisible anymore," part of me was thinking of those receipts. The silent trail of proof that I was always there. Always invested. But none of them saw that trail. They just walked on it, over it, as if it were pavement. Emma knew, though. That night, after the house had quieted and the music finally stopped, she came into the guest room where I'd been left alone. She had something in her hand, a folded piece of paper. "It's from your sewing drawer," she said. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a needle. It was an old check stub. $10,000 to help Kim restart her business after the boutique closed. Emma read it, her brow furrowed. "Grandma," she said, "they never told me you helped with that." "They don't need to tell anyone," I said. "I didn't give it for applause." "But you gave, over and over, and they—" She didn't finish. We sat there a long time. She asked questions. I answered. Not angrily, not bitterly, just honestly. And something shifted in her face, like she saw me for the first time, not as the woman who picked her up from dance class or baked cookies for fundraisers, but as someone whole, someone with a history, a spine. "I think they forgot you're a person," she said quietly. "I think," I replied, "they just got used to thinking I'd always be there, like the porch light. You don't notice it until it's off." And it was off now, off and cooling. But maybe, just maybe, I was ready to switch it back on. For myself. There was a day I signed away my house. I sat at the long oak table in my own kitchen, the same one where I'd once taught Emma to shell peas, and where Jack used to thump his muddy boots after a long day. The realtor smiled too much. Davy flipped through the papers too fast. And me? I just stared out the window at the lilac bush Jack had planted on our 10th anniversary. "Mom," Davy said gently, "you'll be so much more comfortable in the condo. No more yard work, no more repairs." I remember nodding. I nodded a lot in those days. We signed the documents. They thanked me. Davy hugged me tightly, like it was a gift I was giving them. It was. But it wasn't the house that haunted me afterward. It was how quickly they started calling it theirs. Kim repainted everything, tore out the wallpaper I'd put up with my own hands, replaced the sink where I used to wash Jack's shirts. Davy built a fire pit in the back. Good idea, sure. But it sat right where Jack used to stack wood each fall. They never asked me about any of it. Just did it. "You're always welcome, Mom," Kim said once, waving toward the guest room. It used to be my sewing room. Now it smelled like eucalyptus and had a printed sign on the door that said, "Retreat in cursive font." I hated that sign. I hated how they called it a fresh start. For whom? Certainly not for me. Every time I visited, I felt like a guest in the life I used to host. I walked on eggshells in a house I once mopped barefoot. I brought store-bought pies because I was told, kindly, "You don't have to bake anymore, Mom. Just relax." But I never was relaxed. I'd sit at the dinner table while they discussed home equity and child psychologists and fitness apps I didn't understand. And sometimes, Davy would pat my hand and say, "Don't worry, Mom, we've got everything handled." They didn't need me anymore. Only, strangely, they still needed my money. It wasn't even malicious, I don't think. Not at first. It was convenience, entitlement dressed as gratitude. They believed, somewhere deep down, that I owed it to them. Because I'd always given. Even when Jack died and I had nothing but that house and a few CDs in the bank, I gave. Even when the furnace broke in winter and I heated the place with space heaters, I gave. Even when I downsized to the condo and sold the piano I loved so I could pay the closing costs myself, I gave. Because it was what I did. Because I believed that was love. And in return, they rewrote the story. It became their house, their upgrade, their family hub. And I became the woman in the guest room, a polite visitor, a helper, a funder, but never a guest of honor. I remember the last Thanksgiving I hosted, before I signed the deed. Everyone came. The table was too small, the oven too old, the chairs mismatched. But we were together. I made everything from scratch, even the rolls. Davy stood up after dinner and gave a little toast. To Mom, he said, smiling, for pulling it off one more time. One more time. It struck me like a cold wind. Not again, not always, but one more time. Like they'd already decided it would be the last. And it was. The next year, Thanksgiving was in their house. Catered. Less stress, Kim said, and more time to enjoy each other. But I didn't feel enjoyed. I felt positioned. Sat between the coat rack and the powder room. Handed a small plate and told to, sit, don't worry, we'll bring you something. That was the year I learned that less stress meant I didn't get to make anything, that I was no longer needed, just placed. That chair at the barbecue, the one I was pushed from, that wasn't the first time I'd been unseated. It was just the first time I stood back up. Emma was the only one who ever knocked before coming in. Even as a child, she'd pause at the door of my condo and tap 3 times, soft and rhythmic, like a secret code only we knew. The others just barged in. "It's just Grandma," they'd say, like I was a pantry or a garage, something you didn't need permission to access. But Emma knocked, and she waited. She was 13 the first time I realized she saw me. Really saw me. It was a cold February evening, one of those nights when loneliness wraps itself around your ankles and climbs. I had made stew and fresh bread, as I always did on Fridays, and no one had shown up. Davy had said they'd come by. "Just a quick stop, Mom. We'll bring the kids. They miss you." They didn't come, but Emma did. She came alone, cheeks pink from the wind, hair tangled from the bus ride, holding a grocery bag with chocolate and lavender lotion. "I know you probably have everything," she said shyly, "but I saw these and thought of you." I remember staring at the lotion bottle, too stunned to speak. It had been years since anyone had brought me something just because. We sat on the couch and watched old movies. She asked me questions, not out of obligation, but curiosity. About Jack. About what my wedding dress looked like. About whether I ever got scared living alone. "No," I'd said. But it wasn't entirely true. The silence scared me sometimes. Not the kind outside, but the one inside. The kind that settles in when no one's asked you a real question in weeks. Emma changed that. She started calling me once a week. Not long conversations, just enough to hear my voice. She came over after school sometimes. We baked. We talked. Sometimes she didn't say anything at all, just sat with me. She never looked at her phone when she was with me. I asked her once why. She said, "Because you're the only person who listens to me like I'm not stupid." It broke my heart a little. Because I knew exactly what that felt like. She was different from the others. Sensitive, observant, a little too smart for her own good, maybe. I saw myself in her, the same way I used to study my own mother's hands when I was a girl, trying to learn something unspoken, something steady. And maybe that's why I started confiding in her, carefully at first. A memory here, a sigh there, but she understood. More than once she'd say, "That's not fair," or "You deserve better." Not just nodding, not just being nice, believing it. She saw how they spoke to me, how they dismissed my stories, laughed at my opinions, called me old-fashioned when I didn't know a new term. She once said, "I think they forgot you've lived longer than all of them combined." That line stuck with me. Because she was right. They didn't see the years behind my eyes, the labor, the loss, the lessons. They saw age spots and repetition and slower steps. But Emma saw me, which is why, at the barbecue, when I was on the ground and the world spun and nobody reached for me, it didn't surprise me that she was the only one who did. She knelt down like I was royalty and said, "Are you okay?" Not because she was supposed to, but because she meant it. And later, when I stood on that table, mic in hand, and cracked the silence open, she didn't flinch. She looked proud, as if she'd been waiting for me to remember who I was. That night, when we sat in the den together and she asked to stay, I realized something. I might have lost my seat at their table, but I hadn't lost everything. Because Emma's love wasn't about function. It wasn't a transaction. She didn't need me to babysit or pay for things. She just wanted me. And that was enough to keep going. They threw me a birthday party once. I wasn't invited. It was last year, my 77th. A week before, Davy had called, voice all honey and speed. "Hey, Mom, we're planning something low-key, just family. Saturday evening, our place. You good with that?" Of course I was good with that. What else would I be? I spent the week planning what to wear. Not too fancy. Kim hated when I overdid it, but something that didn't look like I wore it for a grocery run. I picked a navy blouse, simple earrings, and made my lemon bars. Emma liked them. On Saturday, I waited. I sat near the window at 4, then 5. 6. No call, no car pulling into the drive, no surprise knock on the door. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the ache in my knees. At 6:30, I called Davy. No answer. At 7, I tried Kim's number. Voicemail. At 8, Emma texted me. "Grandma, I'm so sorry. I thought you'd be here already." I stared at the message like it was written in a foreign language. "Be here already." I texted back. "Where?" She replied with the address of a restaurant downtown. Expensive. Trendy. A place I'd never been. They'd all been there for hours. The party was well underway. I didn't go. Of course I didn't. I sat at my kitchen table, lemon bars untouched, blouse too warm, and I told myself maybe they'd just forgotten to confirm. Maybe it was all a mix-up. 2 days later, Davy called. "Mom, we're so sorry. It was Emma's job to remind you." Emma's job. He sounded annoyed, not at me, not exactly, but at the inconvenience of explaining, like I was a delivery that hadn't arrived on time. Kim got on the phone, too. "We didn't want to overwhelm you," she said. "It was loud. Lots of people. We figured you'd appreciate the quiet." I laughed, just once. Not because it was funny, but because the alternative was crying. "I made lemon bars," I said. "Oh, Mom," she replied. "That's so sweet. Bring them next time." There wasn't a next time. That moment stuck to my ribs like hunger. I didn't say anything after that. Not to them. I let them carry on with their brunches and book clubs and theme parties. I said yes when they invited me 2 hours before something, and no one seemed to notice when I didn't show. But Emma noticed. She came over the next week with flowers she'd picked from the edge of a trail near school. Wild ones, the kind I liked best. "I'm sorry," she said, not making excuses. "I didn't know they hadn't called you." I believed her. She sat with me while I cut the lemon bars and we ate them in silence. That's the thing about being truly seen. It doesn't take much after that. Just presence. Just truth. Since then, I kept my expectations low. That's the secret, isn't it? With people like me, keep the bar low enough and you won't feel the sting when they walk right under it. Until the barbecue. Until I heard someone laugh when I hit the ground. I didn't look to see who it was. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, I realized something very old and very true. They weren't going to change. Not on their own. Not unless something interrupted the script. They had grown comfortable with my absence. My silence had become the music they danced to. So I stood and I spoke. Not for them, for me, for the woman who had once filled rooms with music and noise and laughter. For the mother who packed lunches and folded worries and rubbed backs during fevers. For the grandmother who got dressed up and made lemon bars and waited. And maybe, just maybe, for the girl who brought flowers. I wasn't supposed to see the group chat, but I did. Emma left her phone charging in the kitchen while she helped me carry laundry baskets from the car. She'd offered to help without asking, as she always did, and we spent the afternoon folding towels and listening to her playlists somewhere between Billie Holiday and Billie Eilish. She got a text. The screen lit up. I didn't mean to read it. But when your own name appears in a thread labeled Fam Only, it's hard not to look. The message was from Kim. Please tell Grandma not to go overboard at the BBQ. Last time she started telling that tractor story again. It's embarrassing. Underneath it, a laughing emoji from Molly, my other granddaughter. Then Davy. Yeah, let's just keep her away from the mic. One awkward moment and she'll take over the whole day. You know how she gets. Another string of emojis. Then a fourth message from someone I didn't recognize, probably one of Kim's cousins. Put her in the shade with a cold drink and she'll fall asleep by 3. The rest blurred. I don't remember how long I stood there. I don't even remember if I breathed. Emma walked in, saw the screen in my hand, and froze. Her eyes widened. I didn't know they said that, she whispered. I never saw those messages before. I nodded, gave the phone back, sat down at the table. What surprised me most wasn't what they said. It was how unsurprised I was. It was confirmation, not revelation. That's how far gone things had gotten. The way they talked about me behind my back wasn't shocking. It was expected. And still, something in me cracked like dry earth under sudden pressure. You see, I spent years believing I was included, not just physically, but emotionally. I thought my presence, however quiet, still meant something. That even if I wasn't central, I was at least respected. Turns out I was more character than person. A prop. A mascot. Grandma, in the corner. Funny when she tells old stories, a little annoying when she goes too long. Dress her up, give her a drink, and let her nap while the grown-ups run the show. That's what they thought. And that's when I realized they weren't ashamed of me because I'd failed them. They were ashamed because I reminded them of where they came from, of who raised them, of the woman with dirt under her nails and a loud laugh and a shelf full of outdated spices. I didn't fit the new image. I didn't match the filtered photos or the Pinterest boards, and it was easier to minimize me than reconcile with that discomfort. Easier to reduce me to stories about tractors and pies than to face the truth, that they were made from me. From my sleepless nights and pinched pennies and prayers mumbled over laundry. From my calloused hands and aching back and every birthday card with a 20 slipped inside, even when I couldn't afford it. I was the bones beneath their success, and now they were embarrassed of the skeleton. The next day, Emma returned with a small, handmade card. She didn't say anything, just left it on my table. Inside was a drawing, me in my garden, wearing my sun hat, and beside it, her handwriting, "You are not invisible to me." I kept it on my fridge. Still do. Because in a house full of unspoken judgments and whispered group chats, that one sentence was louder than all of it. And when the day of the barbecue came, when I stood on that table with my voice in my hand and the mic buzzing, I thought of that card. I thought of what it means to be truly seen, and I decided they could keep their group chat. I had something better. I had my voice back. It wasn't the heat, or the fall, or even the silence that followed. It was the laughter, that soft, smothered giggle from someone behind the grill. That's what did it. I don't know who it was. Maybe one of Kim's cousins. Maybe Molly. It doesn't matter. What matters is that someone saw an old woman fall and found it funny. That sound snapped something in me that had held firm for years. The invisible threads I'd knotted into patience, humility, self-restraint, they all tore at once. And standing there, dust on my skirt, the sun pressing hard against my shoulders, I finally saw what they saw. A joke. Not a matriarch. Not a pillar. Not the woman who once made miracles out of $10 and a cast-iron skillet. Just Grandma. Clumsy. Outdated. Disposable. I picked up the mic like I'd picked up 1,000 fallen things before. Crayons, bottles, bills, broken promises. And I climbed the table. Every muscle in my body ached. Not just from age, but from memory. From holding everything in for too long. From letting myself be folded into the background of a life I'd helped build. They say dignity is quiet. They're wrong. Dignity makes noise when you've starved it too long. The moment I stood up there, shoes slipping on the varnished wood, the party paused. Drinks froze mid-sip. Conversations clipped short. Children stopped running. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The microphone carried it, but so did the truth. You pushed me, I said, and not just today, for years, inch by inch. Someone chuckled nervously. I didn't flinch. I gave you my time, my money, my back, my silence, and you turned all of it into an expectation, into a routine. You dressed my generosity and obligation and called it love. Kim took a step forward, but Davy put his hand on her arm. You dressed me up when it suited your image. You muted me when it didn't. You invited me to things like a formality, like I was a stamp on an envelope, proof that you'd done the right thing. I looked at the children. You want to know who your family is? It's not the curated version you post online. It's not the catered meals or the matching outfits. It's the woman who sat in waiting rooms when your father had asthma attacks, who sold her wedding ring to pay for tutoring, who missed her own anniversary to babysit. I saw Emma. Her eyes were glassy, but she didn't look away. And I won't be erased. I won't sit in the shade while you tell yourselves I'm happy to be quiet. Davy opened his mouth then, and I waited for the usual. Mom, come on, or you're making this harder than it needs to be. But nothing came out. Because he knew. They all knew. I hadn't said anything new. I'd just said it out loud. For once. For those of you who find this uncomfortable, I said, good. Let that discomfort do something. Let it clean your ears. Let it remind you that I'm still here. I took a breath. And if any of you feel embarrassed, ask yourselves why. Because I didn't insult anyone. I didn't lie. I just stopped pretending. I stepped down, slowly, the mic still warm in my hand. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't need validation. I just needed to stand, and once I had, I wasn't going back. Not to silence, not to the shade, not to being the joke. The only thing I regretted was not doing it sooner. They tell you to pick your moment, to wait for the right time, to be measured, graceful, respectful. But no one tells you what to do when no moment is given. When you're always the afterthought, the second seat, the extra plate. So I made my moment. And this is what I said, start to finish. Not loud, not trembling, just steady. like a bell rung in the distance that keeps echoing long after the sound itself fades. "I won't be long," I began. "That's something I've said 1,000 times. I won't be long. Don't worry about me. I'm fine." I looked around the backyard. The lights strung up in careful lines, the drink station with its infused water, the curated playlist meant to please all generations. I saw the people, faces I'd fed, taught, changed, carried. "And maybe that's the problem," I said. "Maybe I've spent too many years trying not to take up space." A child whispered, and a mother hushed them. The air felt still, heavy. "I used to host this barbecue, not for credit, not for show. Just because I loved it. I loved cooking for you, watching you laugh, cleaning up long after everyone left. That was how I loved." I paused. Let that settle. But somewhere along the way, love became currency. You started thinking of me not as someone who wanted to give, but someone who should, who owed you. I looked directly at Davy. "I paid for this party. You didn't ask me to, not with words, but you did with your silences, with your expectations. And I gave. Because that's what I do. That's who I am." My voice didn't waver. I was surprised by that. And yet, when I fell today, when my son pushed me off a chair, no one rushed. No one offered a hand. Except Emma. Emma lowered her eyes. I think she was crying. And maybe some of you thought it wasn't a big deal. Maybe you told yourselves it was an accident, that I'd get over it, that I'm used to being brushed aside. I nodded. You're right. I am used to it. I've been getting brushed aside for years. I let my eyes move slowly, landing on each familiar face. You stopped hearing my stories. You laughed when I used the wrong words. You corrected me at the dinner table. You joked about how I repeat myself. You patted my shoulder like I was a pet. A sharp inhale somewhere in the crowd. I'm not angry, I said, and I meant it. I'm done being angry. I'm just done being small. I took a breath. The kind you take when you're standing on the edge of something. I'm not the grandma in the corner anymore. I'm not the ghost in your group chat. I'm not the woman who hands you checks with a smile and says, "No need to pay it back." I'm not the errand runner. I'm not the backup babysitter. I'm not the soft landing you expect to always be there. I raised the mic just a little. I'm a woman. I'm a mother. I'm a widow. I'm a person who has lived 78 years, and I have earned my place at every table. No one moved. I won't be attending the next barbecue. I won't be showing up unless I'm invited, not out of guilt or tradition, but because someone genuinely wants me there. I caught Kim's eye. She looked pale. I won't be giving out money or time or effort to anyone who treats me like a favor they've outgrown. Then I turned to Emma. But I will open my door to anyone who sees me, truly sees me. I gave a final nod. And if you think all of this is dramatic, good. Maybe it's finally loud enough to be heard. That was the end of it. No applause, no cries of protest. Just a long, stunned silence, which was more than enough, because for the first time in decades, they were listening. After the speech, I walked inside. No slamming doors, no dramatic exits, just my feet moving over their polished floors, past their curated family photos, and echoing laughter that hadn't quite figured out how to stop. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, retreat, the sign on the door still smug, and waited. Not for someone to follow, not for an apology, just waited. Sometimes stillness is the loudest thing a person can do. It took 17 minutes, Emma came first. Of course she did. She didn't say anything right away. Just closed the door softly behind her, then sat beside me. We faced the same direction, toward the window where the string lights blinked in slow confusion. "They're mad," she said. "I know. They don't understand. They will." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You were amazing." I let out a quiet breath. I was honest. It wasn't the same thing, but it was enough. Then the door creaked open again. Molly, red-eyed, mouth tight. She didn't sit. "I didn't mean to laugh when you fell," she said quickly. "It just... someone else did, and I'm sorry." I nodded. Not forgiveness. Not condemnation. Just acknowledgement. She hesitated. "I didn't know how much you did. For everyone." "You weren't supposed to," I said. "That's what makes it real. You do it anyway." Molly wiped her nose with the sleeve of her hoodie and left. I was grateful she came. Not because it fixed anything, but because it proved something had cracked open. The silence didn't hold like it used to. The next one to appear wasn't Davy. It was Kim. Her heels clicked against the hardwood, her smile tight, her eyes cautious. "Are you okay?" she asked. The wrong question. "I'm not injured," I said. She nodded, blinking. "You really took everyone by surprise." That was the idea. A pause. "We were just trying to make sure you didn't feel overwhelmed. You know how loud these things get. We thought maybe you'd prefer some peace." I almost laughed. "You didn't give me peace," I said. "You gave me exclusion and called it kindness." Her jaw tensed. "That's not fair." "No," I agreed. "It's not. But it's true." She didn't reply. Just stood there, gripping her phone like it might buzz and rescue her. "I'm not here to make anyone feel bad," I added. "I'm just done pretending that what you've done isn't what it is." She left after that. No apology. Not yet. But less defensiveness in her walk. A seed, maybe. Davy came last. He didn't knock. He stood in the doorway, arms folded, like he was bracing for a storm. "You embarrassed us," he said. "No," I replied. "I embarrassed myself by waiting this long." He shifted. "I've always tried to take care of you," he said. "Moved you closer. Kept you involved." "You moved me into the guest room of your life," I said. "That's not the same." He looked hurt. "Good. You could have just talked to me." "I tried," I said. "You were too busy looking past me." He sighed, ran a hand through his hair. "So what now? You hate us?" I shook my head. "No. I finally love myself enough to stop disappearing for you." He stared at me a long time. Then, to my surprise, he sat. Just for a moment. But it was something. And in that moment, he looked more like the boy who used to bring me dandelions than the man who forgot my birthday. "I don't know how to fix it," he said. I looked out the window. "You don't need to fix it," I said. "You just need to see it." The Monday after the barbecue, I called my lawyer. Not the one Davy recommended years ago, the man who sent birthday cards with firm logos on them and always spoke more to my son than to me. No, I called Ms. Hannah Lowe, a woman I'd met at a community lecture on elder rights last fall. Sharp, unsentimental, the kind of person who listens to the pauses as much as the words. I told her what I needed: a full review of my will, my accounts, and a change of power of attorney. "I want it all in writing," I said. "No more assumptions." She didn't ask what had happened. She just set an appointment. It felt strange, walking into her office with a cane in one hand and a folder in the other, not because I needed help, but because I was finally helping myself. We sat at a long table under a print of Georgia O'Keeffe flowers. I've spent my whole life giving, I told her. But now, I need to make sure what I leave doesn't erase me further. She nodded. You want clarity. I want control. And that's what we did. We removed Davy as power of attorney, not as punishment, but as protection for both of us. I appointed a neutral professional. I updated my will to reflect my actual wishes, not the ones they'd assigned to me in family lore. I made specific bequests, not to divide, but to define. Emma would receive my sewing machine, my journals, and the box of recipes I kept taped to the inside of kitchen cabinets. Molly, if she asked, could have the piano sheet music. She was the only other one who ever touched those keys. I left instructions for the lilac bush at the old house, should it ever be removed. Cut a branch, root it somewhere new. And I added one more item, a letter. Not to be opened until after I was gone. Not because I had final words, but because sometimes the truth is easier to hear in past tense. When I left the office, the sun was sharp and high. I felt taller. That evening, I took down the group family photo from the hallway. I replaced it with a painting Emma had done of my old garden. I started sorting my drawers, not to discard, but to reclaim. I found things I'd forgotten. Postcards from Jack, letters from my sister, a cassette of my own voice reading Charlotte's Web to Davy when he had the flu. I played it once, just to hear myself young again. Then I called the condo board and asked about volunteer positions. I've got hands, I told them, and a mind that's still working. They offered me a spot organizing community events. Next, I made an appointment with a therapist. Not because I was broken, because I was ready to stop carrying it all alone. And slowly, without spectacle, I began to take back what had been mine all along: choice, voice, space. I didn't tell the family about the legal changes. Not yet. Because this wasn't about them. This was about me planting new seeds, not out of anger, but from clarity. And if they came back around one day, I wanted them to know. I would welcome them with open arms, but not empty ones. No more giving what I couldn't afford to lose. No more smiling through erasure. No more inheritance of silence. From now on, everything I left behind would speak plainly. They came to Sunday lunch like nothing had changed. Davy brought a bottle of wine. Kim brought a salad she didn't let me dress. The kids carried in laughter and devices and not a single question about how I'd been since the barbecue. They thought we'd moved on, but I hadn't. I had prepared the table myself. No catered platters, no fuss. Just stew, warm bread, fresh pears. Enough to say, you are welcome, but I am not performing. They sat. They ate. They complimented the seasoning, as if that could smooth over everything that had come undone. Halfway through the meal, Davy lifted his glass. To Mom, he said awkwardly, for still making the best stew in town. They clinked glasses. I didn't. I folded my napkin in my lap. I made some changes this week, I said. Calm. Even. Davy looked up. Changes? Yes, I said. To my will, to my power of attorney, to my boundaries. Kim stiffened. Mom, what's going on? I'm taking my life back, I said. Not out of spite, out of self-respect. Molly scoffed gently, whether out of nerves or guilt I didn't know. Emma didn't move. I've realized, I continued, that being needed isn't the same as being valued, and that I've spent far too long mistaking gratitude for inclusion. Davy set down his glass. Are you saying you think we don't love you? I'm saying, I replied, that love, when it's convenient, isn't love. The room fell still. Kim opened her mouth, but I held up my hand, gently but firmly. I'm not angry, I said. Not anymore. but I am awake, and with that awakening comes new rules. I turned to Davy. You won't be managing my affairs anymore. It's nothing personal. I just don't believe decisions about my life should be filtered through someone who doesn't ask how I'm doing before asking what I can give. His face flushed, but he didn't interrupt. I won't be contributing financially to anything that isn't discussed openly, respectfully, and without assumption. No more backdoor requests, no more guilt. If you need something, you ask. If I can help, I will. If not, the answer is no, and I don't explain my no. Kim looked as though she might cry, but didn't. I won't be attending events where I'm treated like a relic or a mascot. If I'm invited, it's because I'm wanted, not just expected. And I decide how long I stay. Emma nodded. Just once. I'm not removing myself from this family, I said. I'm finally entering it on equal terms. I let that settle. Then, softer. I'm still your mother, your grandmother. That hasn't changed. But I'm also a person, one who deserves dignity, one who still has chapters left to write. No one spoke for a while. Then Davy cleared his throat. I didn't realize, he said, and it sounded almost real. You didn't ask, I said. Kim reached for her water. I feel like we failed you. No, I said. You stopped seeing me. That's not the same. She looked down. Emma, at last, broke the silence. I see you, Grandma. I looked at her. I know, I said. After lunch, no one stayed long. There were hugs, tighter than usual, a few lingering glances. Words left unsaid, but I didn't chase them. I watched from the window as they pulled out of the drive, and I didn't feel empty. I felt aligned. Like the house had shifted just slightly, and for the first time in a long while, it was standing on solid ground. A month later, I hosted a brunch. Not for them, for me. I made quiche, brewed strong coffee, and set out the blue plates I'd kept boxed since the move. Too old-fashioned, Kim had said once. I used them anyway. I invited 3 women from the condo. One had recently lost her husband. One was learning to live with a new diagnosis. One just seemed lonely. We ate slowly, talked like grown women, not caricatures of ourselves. No one checked their phone. No one corrected the way someone told a story. We laughed, not the kind of laugh that needs a photo, but the kind that needs a real reason. I felt more present in that 2-hour meal than I had in 10 years of family gatherings. Later that afternoon, Emma came by. She knocked, as always. She brought a scarf she'd crocheted, deep green, imperfect. She said it was for warmth and also just for something to do with my hands. I wore it as we sat on the porch. You've changed, she said. No, I smiled. I've returned. She leaned her head on my shoulder. The air was cool. The leaves were starting to turn. Not quite fall yet, but close enough to smell it. I've started writing things down, I told her. Not just stories, thoughts, what I've learned, what I'd want someone to know if they ever felt like they were disappearing. Will you let me read it? One day. She sat up, looked at me. Are you okay now? I took a breath. Yes, because I was. I had stopped shrinking, stopped apologizing, stopped confusing patience with silence, stopped performing gratitude for scraps of attention. I had given birth to a family, raised it, carried it, paid for its mistakes, forgave its carelessness. But now I was raising myself again, watering the parts they forgot to tend, rooting into the ground on my own terms. And I wasn't bitter. I was better. I wasn't angry. I was free. Free to say no without guilt. Free to say yes without being used. Free to take up space without explaining why I was there. That evening, I sat in the quiet of my kitchen with the last slice of peach tart, and I realized I didn't need them to return what I'd given. I just needed to stop giving what I never truly offered with joy. From now on, what I give will come from me, not out of duty, not to earn love. Just because I choose to. And if you're reading this, if you've ever felt like the chair was pulled out from under you, literally or otherwise, know this. You don't need permission to stand. You don't need applause to speak. You don't need to wait for someone to see you. Stand anyway. Speak anyway. Be anyway. They may not like it, but you'll recognize yourself again, and that's worth everything. If this story touched something in you, share it, save it, or send it to someone who needs to hear it, because invisibility ends the moment we speak.